I'd like to just run the meeting over to Adam. I think we all know who Adam is, know what it is because we've been talking for the last few minutes. Adam, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. And thanks for Brennan for connecting us. And really honored to be here and talk with you guys about my book and about self-hosting in general. I'll just start with a little bit of background. I've been in tech for just a couple decades, so not very long. And but I've done several startups and worked at some big enterprise companies as well, Boeing, Johnson & Johnson, and the startups you probably wouldn't know the names of. Maybe classmates.com. Anybody heard classmates.com? They were the most, they were like the, let's see, biggest advertiser on the net at one time. It's kind of an infamous designation, but they would spend all their money on advertising until there were no more ads left on the internet. So anyway, they're still around in some capacity. But yeah, so I worked in tech, and then 2020 I went full-time running the house. So I'm like house husband now, which is a pretty sweet job if you can get it. I hear retirement's even better. So I'm on the way. But I take it pretty seriously, and I really love what I do, and I love my family. And part of that was kind of during COVID, I wanted to give my kids a safe place to use the internet. You know, the lockdowns happened, pandemic went into full swing. They were kind of forced on the internet. Teachers were just kind of sending YouTube links. It was a really uncomfortable situation for me, having a lot of background in free and open source software. Somebody mentioned LibrePlanet earlier this year, and I love that stuff, and I try not to be too idealistic, but I'm really a fan of free software. Having been in industry for quite a while, I always wanted to work in open source software, free software, and actually write it and produce it and sell it. And I got to do that a bit at a couple different places. When the pandemic hit in full swing and I just started to become a house husband, I had time to set up the server, and I learned kind of a new technique from a friend, and then did a lot of research on my own. It wasn't like a new technique, but rather, since I had been self-hosting way back in the the aughts, when you just kind of set up a Slackware Linux, or you got a Unix AIX server somewhere at a college, and then you get a little account on a shared host and all that. So I'd been through all that, and the CGI revolution, Perl, C, and then Java, and I've kind of gone through all those machinations. The latest stuff is just, a lot of that old stuff still lives on, but the new stuff for hosting websites was really exciting to me. It was really easy to get started. You can run a lot of things side by side. I mean, a lot of this work that's done, the modern containerization stuff, and containerization is nothing new. I think back in the aughts we used what is it called, Solaris zones, and so in BSD jails, or even older. I mean, all this stuff is, Plan 9 for Unix. I love that stuff. So some of these good ideas have just been kind of distilled and carry on, and I feel like that's what the current generation of stuff you can flip on at your house if you have network and power that's sufficient, or perhaps at a colo or shared location or whatever. But I've found a lot of benefits to running my own stuff. And after burning things in for a couple of years, so by then it's about 2022, I realized that this is really, it was really useful. By the way I set it up, it was cheaper than just using the cloud, and it was robust. And I thought it was worth spreading. I couldn't find any books about it, so I wrote a book. I released it earlier this year, and this will be a chance for me to test screen sharing, because I want to do some more of that. So let me just see if I can show. Okay, good. Looks like that's showing up. So that's just the home page to get you guys a picture of the cover of the book and all that. And it's got my bio. So I won't go into any more deep detail about my bio. I'll just get into what I want to present. And then I'd like it to be really interactive. But I'm not really good at following the chat, I find. So if there's something you really want to like stop me or get more explanation about, just if you can get vocal or raise your hand, or somebody that is off mute, just mention, hey, there's something in the chat you're missing, because I generally don't pay attention to the chat. I can't read and talk at the same time very well. Okay, so let's see. We've covered my background and then why I wrote the book. And then the book itself is not very long. It's about 160 pages. And if you're familiar with some of this stuff, if you've turned on a web server before, if you've hosted some websites, then quite a bit of it might be review. There's a lot of new technology that's pretty cool, though. And for folks that have been doing this for a while, I think it's their best position to just slot in a few new technologies. And you'll hear me talk a lot about Docker and stuff like that, but I don't want to come across as a Docker fanatic. It's just one way to containerize. There's many ways to do it today. It does seem like Docker has quite a bit of a head of steam on it. So I chose that for the method in my book because I just wanted things that were going to last many years beyond the book itself. I couldn't be updating it, very often. It's pretty tough with a book. Okay, so let's see. I want to move on to the services, but any questions about the book before I jump into just what I think is kind of the exciting parts about the services you run? Okay, so yeah, the things that got me interested I was like, I wanted to run a Nextcloud server was interesting to me. I really wanted to pull all my photos off of Google Photos. So I wanted to de-Google, and then I was like, well, what about all data? How about all documents, all the stuff I care about, have it all locally? I thought that'd be pretty cool because then if I wanted to search through everything, or I wanted to convert all my images from Hike to JPEG, or just like if I wanted, I often do like to operate directly on my own data. I wanted to host it myself. I wanted autonomy. Privacy is kind of interesting to me, but I'm not too concerned about privacy. It feels to me more like just the freedom to do whatever I want with my own data. And it would make me upset when I couldn't just like get all my photos from Google, or I was trying to do, I had been using Facebook for quite a while, but you can't just like do bulk operations against your data at Facebook. And if you go and look at, if you've been using something like Facebook, Apple, Google for a while, they'll have just kind of a mountain of data. I mean, it's amazing how much builds up over time. Google's fairly transparent about letting you download your own data. And I had something 40, 50 gigs of data up there. I'm like, what is all this? And now I have it all at home, and I understand a lot more about, what data I have. And obviously a lot goes on with that. And I cover all that in the book, like security and backups and all that, which is non-trivial, I'll be honest, but it is a lot of fun. Okay, so just skimming the chat. I don't see any questions for me, so I'm going on. If there's something I missed, let me know. Okay, so that's the book and the cover and the website. I'm sure you can find all that. I think it was in the email as well. Oh yeah, you can read the book pretty easily in a browser too. This is just like the HTML. Oh, this is actually the ASCII doc version. So you folks familiar with markup like Markdown, ASCII doc, even HTML? I mean, so these different kinds of markup are just mini languages to transform, they just add a little bit of instrumentation or metadata to text to make it a bit more useful. So I wrote this entire book in a language called ASCII doc, and the source of this document this is ASCII doc, so it's similar to Markdown or restructured text, those kind of things. But I just have a little browser plugin that actually renders it, and this is pretty close to what the rendered book looks like when you load the HTML version. I'll just go ahead and load the HTML version in case we refer to it here. Yeah, okay, so it just has like a timestamp in here and a version when it gets generated, and it gets these links generated at the bottom too. So I find the HTML or the PDF versions are great for cross-referencing, for quickly jumping around, but there's a paperback version you can take with you on the bus and stuff like that. Okay, so I have got a virtual machine running. I have a server running as well, bare metal, but I didn't set that one up for sharing. This one is just like a test site. And this is the traffic reverse proxy. Anybody familiar with it? Okay, anybody want me to explain it further? Like what is a reverse proxy, or why am I even talking about this at all? Or
It'd be great to hear what it is in comparison to something like Nginx or Squid.
excellent. Let's see, Squid. I haven't used Squid in a while. Does that do? That's a proxy, right?
Yes.
Okay, Squid is a proxy. So reverse proxying is where you have a web server in front of a bunch of services, and instead of making a way for you to go out, let's say the cloud is up here, the internet's up there, and I'm going out to it. Well, I'm going to go out to a bunch of different websites, and I'm going to appear as one IP address or something like that. This proxy will give you a way to say jump over a NAT, jump through a subnet, get out there to the internet. A reverse proxy will allow people, yourself, others on the internet, to go the other direction and get to a bunch of services. So you can host a whole bunch of services behind one reverse proxy. Nginx does it, Apache does it. There's Caddy, HA proxy might do it. I think that does reverse proxying. And then this one I'm showing is just called traffic. Traffic is handy because if you use it in conjunction with Docker, or I'm sure Kubernetes as well, you start up a bunch of containers with different services. Each service has all their own stuff. That's one way to do it that I talk about in the book. The service would have its own database, its own file system, etc. You fire that one up, and then it just pops up on Traffic's dashboard here. So I've started a few things here: eSign, Wallabag, Actual, and pbin. And I hope I have time to show you all these services. We can spend more or less time. I just now flipped on Actual, so I want to see if this one's working. Oh, yes. Okay. Somebody must have sacrificed a chicken to the demo gods today, because I never get this lucky. Okay, who's seen Actual? Anyone using it? Oh, yes. Okay, another home run. So you folks use like Quicken, Microsoft Money, any of those things? Okay. Well, this is like that. So that or GNU Cache, if you're free software fans, whatever. This is just a way to manage finances. Yeah, GNU Cache. Let's hear it. GNU Cache almost broke up my marriage, so I'm not going to talk about it. No, I'm just kidding. We sort of kidding. It was not fun to try and use with multiple people, and dual entry accounting is hard to learn. But I think GNU Cache is powerful, and I think that Actual. Now I just clicked on the demo here to jump right in, but I think Actual is doing dual entry accounting, but it makes it simpler for you. So it simplifies it quite a bit. Oh yeah, Ledger, nice. You guys are bringing up. Okay, sweet. There should be a whole talk about different ways of managing your finances with whatever. So this is just one you can self-host really easily. Actual is really interesting. The entire thing is a web app. I don't think there's much at all server side except a very lean web server that synchronizes a SQLite file. So y'all familiar with the SQLite database? SQLite. Okay, so just it's a single file database. It's not particularly efficient. It's just convenient, and it works quite well for small scale applications. So in this case, there's a representation of all your finances with actual. There's a representation of all your finances and accounts and such. And there's a bit to learn, but it's quite fast. It has some really handy budgeting features. The reports are pretty nice. And the reason I'm talking about it at all is you can self-host it just in a, I took, I think, 5 minutes before this talk to add a couple lines on my server, flip it on, and it's running. So I'm going to jump over really quick to the console. Let's give that a shot and see if that's useful to you guys. Any questions about actual before I show kind of how I flipped it on? No, okay. So don't talk as much. Gotta get active. Gotta put the gears to me a little bit, and I'll try and keep up. Okay, so let me screen share the console. Let's see, where is it? Ansible. Okay, is that showing up okay? Can you guys see my terminal?
Yep, we see it.
Thank you. Okay, so here I'm just kind of showing, this is called Docker. This command Docker stats shows the Docker containers that are running. And again, just briefly, is that a familiar enough concept if I'm just talking about Docker containers? Or does anybody, I'm happy to jump into that a little bit and explain Docker containers. You let me know.
I think you can take it as given that this club knows what Docker is, right, Jerry?
Yeah, we've actually had presentations on Docker and Kubernetes and stuff like that.
Awesome. Well, and feel free to like direct me if there's something more useful to you guys, because I'm just getting to know all of you for the except for Brandon and Don. I'm meeting all of you for the first time, so I'd love feedback in terms of like, hey, why don't you dig into this or that a little more, and I'll be happy to do that. Just let me know. Anyway, what we're looking at here looks pretty similar to what we saw on the traffic dashboard. These are the containers running, and with Docker Compose, it uses the directory name and then the service name. So actual, there's a folder on this. Let's see if I can show that. Yeah. Okay. So I have a bunch of services ready to run on this computer, on this server here, but only a few of them are running. So actual is running here, and why does that say microbin? Oh, I just misnamed it. Okay, actually this might be useful. Let's okay, let me pop back on my admin computer. Okay, so this is something I cover a lot in the book. How I kind of walk you through setting up an admin computer to control your server. And I think it's useful to have two separate computers. You can totally do it on one server. I think you did it that way, right, Don? You kind of got your admin code on your server and you can provision it right from there. Yeah, so that's totally doable as well. But in general, I'll be talking about like the admin computer and the server. The server is where all the services are running. So I just jumped back to my admin computer. In this, it's called Pickle. And so if you see this Adam at Pickle, then that's when I'm on my admin computer. So I've added a couple files on here. So this is the repository right here for the book, and the URL is let's see, GitHub Mianke's SHB. Okay, let me put that in chat. So this repository is where I share with you the book itself, the source code for the book itself, and source code that comes with the book to set up your own server. The source code, the stuff that helps you set up your own server is called Mario, and that's just some arbitrary name for the thing that helps you set up your own server. So I'm in the Mario subdir. So this is my local copy of that Git repository. You guys familiar with source control as well? Just Git. Familiar with Git? Okay. Okay, cool. Well, just slow me down if I'm
At least at a
Maybe not
surface level.
Okay, perfect. That's all I'm going to talk about. Is I have a clone here of the repository with the book and the code, and I'm in the Mario Ansible subdir here, and I've added a couple things. There are a couple services that come with the book. It comes with Jellyfin, Nextcloud, Scratch, Traffic, Wallabag, and Watchtower, and these are all explained in detail, different kinds of services for different things. I just added actual budget for managing your finances and a little Payspin app, and I'm going to show you both those. What I wanted to do briefly is just fix the actual, because I think, here it is. So I called it microbin when I want to call it, let's call it just web. Okay, so the name of the service is what's going to show up in Docker stats back there on the server. So it was called microbin, and I'm going to change it to web. So I'll go in the server really quick. Okay, so I just connected with the server, and this actual microbin container is going, and so I'm just going to stop that. Down, actually. So this is just a little, DC is just a little convenience command to run Docker Compose. This is the expanded command. It's actually running right here. Anybody familiar with Docker Compose? Yeah? Okay. See one hand and a lot of circles.
Not as much
I
as
think
they
there's a
should
way.
be.
Yeah, okay. I think there's a way for you to raise your hand. Yeah, well, you can do it without video too. So that would be helpful for feedback for me if you could try that out. It disable. Oh, but it makes a sound. That's hilarious. Okay, I'm going to disable reaction sounds somehow. Oh, well, I'll figure it out later. Okay, so I just destroyed the actual microbin container, and then I'll go back on my admin computer. So I just disconnected from the server. I'm back on my admin computer. Remember that I just made this change to this file right here. So this is what tells Docker Compose how to start up the actual budget server. And so now I'm going to send the changes in this file back to the server from my admin computer. Now, the code I include with the book, there really isn't much at all. All it does is it's mainly configuration files for Ansible. Folks familiar with Ansible? Yes, no, yes? Don, you read. I could tell he read the book. And so Ansible is a very mature and popular system provisioner, let's say. It can handle as many machines as you have, pretty much. It turns out to be useful even for one machine. But what I did here is just propagated my changes over the server. I'm going to reconnect to the server, and then I'm going to restart the actual service. By starting the service, in this case, it actually will build the software as well. But since it's already built, it has an image sitting there. It just started it right up. You can check out the logs for the server. There really isn't much. And then that's pretty much. Oh yeah, I wanted to show you the stats. So here's Docker stats. So I changed the name of actual microbin. I fixed that service name, and now it's actual web. It's just the web server for actual. I guess even better would be like the actual server. It's a back-end service to synchronize the actual budget database. Okay, so that's the actual budget web service, and I just briefly showed you how to manage your finances in actual. I mean, there's a lot to learn about actual, honestly. I think it's worth it. I think it's worth checking out, but it's probably out of scope for this meeting. This meeting's really about the book and self-hosting and stuff like that. Okay, so that was maybe a lot. Any questions there on how to get a service running? Okay. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and show you a couple other things I self-host. Let me flip back over to my browser. Okay, so here's another service that is quite easy to self-host. It's just another few lines of configuration, and then with Docker Compose, you just say start it up. With traffic, you give it a host name, and then you have a little paste bin. Folks use paste bins much? I don't know. I use them all the time just to like snippets of text, quick image, share it with somebody. And I wanted something offline. I mean, we're doing quite a bit at home again. So thanks for the thumbs up. This one's great. I mean, it's just extremely fast. I think it's on Go. I think it's written in Go. That's great, Brandon. This one's so easy. There's no back-end volume. You know, you can save your data, but part of the paste bin is the temporary nature. So it's handy just to have something that is ephemeral. I don't have any images handy, otherwise I'd send that. But it gives these things a funny name, and they're easy to share. And so I end up using it quite a bit inside the house. I mean, that's it. That one's super simple. I can show you the config file for that really quick. It's fun because it's so tiny. Let's see. Okay, so the paste bin config. Oh, well, okay. There's a number of settings here that are all optional, but I chose to do those for another meeting. So I'll make a link to BLU. There you go. And now at the bottom, if I restart this thing, it'll have a link to the BLU.org homepage at the bottom. But these environment variables are all optional. And in fact, you don't need this config either. So this is basically the minimal config you can use to get that paste bin running, and then you tell Docker Compose just bring it up.
So the traffic labels there, is that the metadata that traffic uses to discover the services it's in charge of?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, one interesting thing about traffic is that you can point it to the Unix socket for Docker, and it will pick up any new container that gets started up in Docker. And if it has the correct traffic labels attached to it, traffic will just pick it up and start serving it up. It's really nice. It is really handy. I could rattle on about traffic for hours.
Yeah, I think with Nginx, Nginx is fine, but unless they change something, I believe you have to restart it. And so you're kind of changing the config, restarting Nginx. Traffic will detect if you start up a service with labels and then automatically route to it. So the domain name will just start working. It'll have an SSL certificate automatically and all that. So the book walks you through setting up a couple variables so it'll do let's encrypt for you and get you HTTPS encryption. I used to think HTTPS encryption was like a really nice to have thing. You know, it's an added expense, but these days it's free. There's almost no effort. It's done for you, but it's really made quite a bit easier with an actual domain name and an API, a DNS provider with a programmatic interface. Any of the modern DNS providers, like you buy a host name from a registrar, you can usually also tell them to serve your DNS, and then you can hit their DNS provider to automatically update DNS records, and traffic does all that for you.
And can I add in there, it's usually possible to create a wildcard host that, like, any sub-host of this host that I designate in my DNS will all resolve to just this one place, which is my IP address at home. And then you can get from Let's Encrypt, you can get a wildcard certificate so that any host name under that main host name, it's all going to apply to that one certificate. So you don't have to be renewing dozens and dozens of certs. And then if you do those two things, whenever you create a new service, you already have the DNS, you have the Let's Encrypt because they're using a wildcard. So I would recommend learn how to do it that way, and then you can just create a bunch of names under that one name, and you're good to go.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly how I do it for my internal network. I have everything, all Let's Encrypt, and all of my internal services have valid Let's Encrypt certs. It's really handy.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, guys. That's a good call out. So Traffic does it with these kind of, they're a little bit hard to read at first, but this line says, give me an SSL certificate for example.com. So get TLS, it's a TLS cert. And this line says get TLS, a TLS cert for star. And it's not a different cert. This'll end up being one cert with a main domain, example.com, and the wildcard for any subdomain as a sans record. What is it? Subject alternate name or something like that. I forget what it stands for. Yeah. But you get one big cert. You get one cert that covers everything. And so it's a lot. I think the Let's Encrypt folks probably like this too, because it's a lot less cert requesting on their end too. Yeah, that's kind of cool. So you can see the cert. Oh yeah, actually, let me show you mine. So it ends up requesting a cert that looks like this. So here's the, this is a domain I'm using for these demos. And I think this is only in my LAN, so you guys probably won't be able to hit any of this, but the cert looks like this. Oh, they both show up under sans. Okay, I don't know. I guess the main site shows up here, and then both of these show up in the subject alt names, sans.
Can I add one more comment about the actually using a certificate in HTTPS?
Yeah, please.
There's lately in the last 10 years or so, there have been a few new services and features added to browsers that treat non-encrypted connections as sort of like second class and broken. The two that come to my mind are WebRTC and using, what's the word, web service workers. If you want to install an application on your server that uses a service worker, and you can look that up, and it's kind of out of the scope of this talk, but if you want to use a service worker, or if you want to use WebRTC, I'm pretty sure it just breaks if you're using not encrypted connection. So the answer to that is just learn how to get along with Let's Encrypt. It's free. It's a little bit of a learning curve if you've never done it before, but it's better, and then you have everything encrypted by default, and just go with the flow. That's the end of my comment.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I found that with, I think it's Nextcloud as well. They started assuming HTTPS was used for different purposes, like the API clients were breaking without HTTPS. And I mean, it's just like, really, there's so much less friction to it. You might as well do it. And especially if you go and open stuff out, if you port forward, if you open anything coming through your WAN, you got to really, if you really must just do that. I would urge everybody to do that. I talk quite a bit about a threat model, knowing your threat model, deciding how much work you should or will do to secure your services, and some ideas on what to look at to do those things. There's a lot of easy options now for securing, and I don't know. One of the things I do is just block all traffic from outside the U.S. because I don't, like, for my home network, I don't allow any. In fact, I don't allow any outside traffic. Anybody? Have you guys used WireGuard much? WireGuard's amazing. So if you've used the old school VPNs, give WireGuard a look. It's just way faster. Nice. I believe WireGuard doesn't really reveal itself at all either, because it's just a UDP service sitting there, and if you send it something that isn't proper for logging in, it'll just ignore it. And so I think it's a little harder to detect via port scan as well. So anyway, WireGuard is a great option to all the old school VPNs.
I'm using Tailscale to great advantage. It's essentially a sort of a more commercial but great free tier sort of easy way to set up a WireGuard VPN. I was just actually working on some of my Portainer agents for VPSs that I have, and then tying them back into my internal network so that everything just is encrypted by default. Like there's no traffic that anybody can identify that isn't encrypted between my VPS servers and the management of Portainer. So
Nice.
I could talk your ears off about that too. I'm a huge fan.
I was looking to.
Sounds like a future BLU talk if you could do it.
Sure.
Yeah, something that Don just got running as well is Authentic for single sign-on identity management. Authentic does quite a bit, actually, but you know, if you have once you have a bunch of services, like here in my browser, I'm showing, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different things, 5 different web UIs, and you know, if it really is truly just inside your LAN, a bunch of these you don't even need authentication for. They'll just let you use them directly, which I think is fine inside your LAN, especially if you kind of segregate your IoT devices like cameras and your fridge and whatever. If you keep those things separate, maybe with VLANs or whatever, then I think it's fairly safe just to leave your services open. Like I mean, you can start using it without without any encryption or anything. I think that's fine. I mean, especially because in my book, I talk about how it's very important to encrypt server side and all that. But there was something I wanted to mention about Actual that I forgot earlier. And because everything is done in the web browser, all the logic, as far as I understand, you can run it totally offline. You don't even need to self-host a server. You can run it in your desktop through a web browser. I think there's also an Electron app, but it's basically just a wrapped web app. So it's quite handy. It's like, say you were synchronizing your files with something else. So I use Nextcloud to synchronize files back and forth between my server. But if you just copied files manually or use sync thing or something else, you can still use and even share actual database files. So anyway, I would highly recommend this one for managing finances. But that feature of it is pretty amazing. I think again their web browser is just kind of web views of it. So when you run Actual on a phone, I think it's just showing a smaller version of the same UI. So pretty awesome how they made it work that way. In fact, let me see. Yeah, if you just size, it might break this browser, but if you just kind of, well, let me give it a shot here. You just size it down. That's the mobile view right there, pretty much. So let me reload it. Yeah. There's the mobile view, actually. So you can still edit budgets and accounts and transactions just from a phone, and it's actually using the same code that responds to the size of a mobile phone instead of a web browser. So go back. Needs to reload here. Okay, so there's back in browser mode, browser sized. So another thing I started self-hosting recently is DocuSeal. This is pretty sweet just for signing PDFs. You know, you have to sign a PDF and put here my signature is like a, boy, that doesn't look great. Well, anyway, my signature is a smiley face in this document, but it makes it quite easy to do these kinds of signatures in documents without having to, you know, I suppose you could just print and sign. There's lots of tools lately to do this, but it's pretty handy to have a little place that hangs on to them, and you can send out documents for signing. You can use it just like HelloSign or DocuSign or stuff. So DocuSeal is completely open source and very easy to self-host as well. I think, yeah, once something is done, it kind of is stuck in there, but It's pretty neat. Yeah, the company that's behind DocuSeal, they did all the research, and you can see it on their website where they talk through the justification of the legality behind online signatures and how these are binding signatures, just like stuff you do on a piece of paper with wet ink. Okay, I'm going to go on to one more. So this one I talk about in the book. This is in whatever chapter 9 goes through the different services, and one of them is Wallabag here. Wallabag is great for saving articles to read later. There's a companion mobile app, so all these will sync to a phone. Works quite well. It's not perfect, but it can digest and save almost any blog post. Some of them are behind paywalls, and some of those can be grabbed by this thing too. I found it pretty awesome. So it's just a version. What's the question? Clip out. What does that mean, Brandon?
So is it something like, I'm trying to think of the other utilities I use, like Evernote used to be, where you could click in your web browser and say, save this URL to my Clipper, and it would go over there. Is this not that kind of tool?
You tell me. I mean, what this does is you give it a URL, and it grabs the full content of the blog post, including the images, and it saves it locally so you can read it later and syncs the whole thing to your phone.
Yeah, maybe that's a little more comprehensive. I'm thinking of just like a URL clipper, but this is actually really cool too. So maybe it'll do something like that.
I see. Oh, there are other ones that do just links, like what's the one I used to use all the time? Delicious, I think it's called.
Yeah, yep. Delicious was, that's the old school one.
Yeah.
I'm looking for something like that. I've been trying to like clip to Obsidian, clip to this, clip to that, and nothing really is a really good one now that I could self-host. If there is something out there, and maybe this Wallabag has like an abbreviated feature to do something simple like that.
I don't think Wallabag's the best tool because it's focused around getting you the content so you can read it later. There's another one I can't think of right now that's just made for saving links. Links and like a little bit of metadata about the links, more like Delicious or even Reddit, I suppose.
A couple people here mentioned Pocket. I'm gonna look at that and see maybe that's
related. Pocket's more like Wallabag. It's an article saver. I got it here somewhere. I'll tell you what the thing is. It's I mean, what's funny? I just use a markdown file right now for saving my links, and I made a little utility to save a link and then grab the title. Let me see what that
could be useful. I mean, I throw it in Obsidian or some other notes app, but it would be really cool to have like I don't know. I just haven't found something that does what Delicious did. If there was something that did that, I would be happy because I've got thousands upon thousands in that old system.
Mm-hmm.
I know that feeling about Delicious. I'm not a Delicious person, but with personal diaries and notebooks, I've been through like 10 different apps in the last 15 years, and I know that feeling of like, this isn't quite right. I need something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I've probably been through 10 in the past 10 weeks between note-taking apps and these. So it's good to get all these suggestions, especially for self-hosted.
I'll add a couple more then. Hoarder is one, and then Redeck.
Cool, thanks. I'm sorry to distract.
No, this is right on topic. This is exactly it. I mean, honestly, this is, I think, what gets folks over the hump to actually start self-hosting. It's like, okay, I really want to run that. Might as well run it. It's not that hard. And then, you got it on your own, and you've got your own data. There's like, you have to get past that, and you have to get enough inertia to actually get the stuff stood up, and it's some effort.
It's finding the use case that's going to get that individual person to finally do it. What is the one thing that person really wants to self-host and get them for that?
Right? Yeah, I agree.
And
I
Adam
think
provides the book. So if you want that one thing and you found that app and you've got a computer lying around, grab that computer, grab Adam's book, and figure out how to set it up.
yeah, just do it. That's right. You gotta have some reason to jump in and stick with it, make it work well. I mean, for me, it was like I was just going crazy with the during the lockdown. I had to do something. These all look interesting. You know what? Honestly, I've been envisioning kind of a different bookmarking is pretty key to my workflow, and I want to keep track of quite a bit. I mean, even quite a bit more than any of these things provide. Like I want to save a bookmark. Maybe however I save it, maybe I just send it to myself on Signal or something. And then I want to save content if that's possible, if it happens to be a blog post. I want to save the title of the HTML title, of course, so I have some description. I want the date and time. And then, I mean, there's so much more you could do with it, right? You could you could have it.
Tagging, note
Yeah.
clouding. It's and Michael here
Yeah.
talks about Joplin, and I do the same thing with Obsidian. You want something in between note taking and tracking of URLs to your save later, your this, and make it so integrated with whatever browser you're using that you can wake up in the morning, open up your browser, and here's the things I tagged to use this morning, or to read this morning, or to follow up on this morning. Integrated, that's just, it would be so helpful, because I click so many things and I'm like, I'll read that in the morning when I get time, and then I forget about it, and or it goes into some pile of URLs that I just never go through.
Yeah, no, same here. Same here. And I mean, the only thing I have done is I at least I save all my URLs in one place. And I also have, I mean, if it happens to be an article, then I save it to Wallabag, but also Wallabag, you know what I mean? So I'd love a central place where it's like, yes, you've got that URL and you got the Wallabag version. Oh, there's another one called Archive Box that's really cool. I was demoing this one at the last. Have you guys heard of Archive Box? Oh, it's so cool. So it's just a way, like, I really love saving web pages exactly as they look. And this thing does like 10 different methods of saving a web page. So you just feed in a URL and it'll give it its darndest to just save a copy of that. So you have a version of it you can refer back to. I mean, there was a court case I was trying to follow very closely, and I wanted to know if a single character changed on a case page. It can tell you that. Yeah, another one. Anyway, yeah, I want the same thing, I think, Brandon, which is just a kind of, yes, I want the URL and I want it to kind of be linked to everything in my own little walled garden in my ecosystem. Link, cross-reference, tag, relate, and then come up with new insights automatically. Oh, I've been looking at this a lot. It's in my history. But of course, the more data you get around that, the more it kind of gets a little sensitive. And that's where when I'm self-hosting, a lot of that chilling effect of like, oh, do I want to put that online? Do I want to put that online? I don't want to put a whole lot of stuff online, but I want to keep everything where I can control it. And so having all those things cross-referenced and related is really important to me.
Yeah, and that was the thing about Delicious, is everything was kind of out there, or by default it was out there, and you could share it. And I'm like, no, I just want to have it on my hard drive, but make it outrageously searchable and accessible. And it's finding that balance that makes it hard.
Yeah, and I think it's important and it's helpful to you, and it's like, and it's not like, is it really useful to the general public? It's just like, I think they were just using it as a way to suck content, like to get users to generate content. I mean, that was the big deal.
Exactly. Nobody cares about your links.
Nobody cares. Nobody cares about your 28 bookmarks of different this and that. What's another? There's another one. So that I'll mention. So archive box is just one I mentioned. You know, actually, I'm looking at this chat. There's no way to save this chat, is there? I guess I'd have to just copy paste. Oh, well.
I think Jabber actually saves them at the end of the meeting.
Oh, okay. Is there a way to, could I get a copy, or is there a way to retrieve it?
Oh yeah, I post them on the BLU website afterwards.
Oh, awesome.
Basically, what I do is I'm during the meeting, I'm selecting the text and pasting it into a window.
Oh, nice. Okay. Thank you, John.
Sure.
Yeah, so archive box, Wallabag is sweet. You know, it's funny. I mean, I still have to keep myself honest because it's so tempting to just go to a website and like, oh, what's new over there? What's new over there? And I'm finding it's harder for me to go back and actually read the stuff I've saved in Wallabag because it's quiet, you know, like the the news on TV or my phone interrupting me or something. Those are a lot more, I think my brain is drawn to those things. So I try and practice going back to like these more interesting posts in Wallabag that I've saved. And I guess it just takes effort, right? That's kind of my challenge, is to refocus, slow down, and get through the stuff that's aligned with my values. So I think a lot of the self-hosted stuff is along those lines too, in that it's up to you how you use it, what you connect. Yeah. Okay, so I'm like scanning this and I'm seeing you guys talking about Obsidian. That's a note-taking app, right? Okay.
Yeah, Obsidian is a text file-based note-taking app.
Okay.
Like a
Nice.
brain mapping software.
Okay, cool. I've been using Markdown files just synchronized with Nextcloud, and my Nextcloud URLs look like, let's see, cloud.example.com f. So links to different files in my Nextcloud are basically, what do you call them, permalinks?
So everything essentially for your organization is file based, and the reason I ask is Obsidian is actually file based on the back end, and then has a front end that presents it, and it's also Markdown.
It is also Markdown, which is one of the nice ones that I really like, because if I want to turn it into something that I want to talk about, like say on my blog or at GitHub, it's really easy for me to just like format it all in Obsidian and just, you know, copy paste or publish. There's lots of ways you can publish on Obsidian.
I want to share an anecdote that I wrote out in the chat because I think it's relevant. I have been using Nextcloud for a year or two, or I can't remember when I started using Nextcloud. And I never really cared much about Nextcloud search. I was like, okay, yeah, I can search, that's great. And also, I've been keeping all of my notes and diaries in some kind of text file or other different apps, but it's got to be text files. And the other day, I was searching for something in Nextcloud. I forgot that I had loaded all of my mail into Nextcloud because I didn't like the mail client very much, so I just kind of set it up and then forgot about it. I searched for a thing and it's showing me, here's results from mail, here's results from your Obsidian notebooks, here's results from your LibreOffice documents. And I was like, whoa, Nextcloud search is actually useful. I can just search all my crap in this one place.
Yeah.
And it's all mine. It's not somebody else's cloud.
Yeah, same. And the search has gotten quite a bit better. You used to have to load this app called Full Text Search. It didn't work well. So I think they're still improving the search with every release. But I also have found that they call it unified search in Nextcloud is pretty handy. Universal. Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe it's unified search. Anyway, it is pretty sweet. I don't know that it searches within. Brendan, do you know if it searches within text files?
Yeah, it did. It came up with
does.
results from my Obsidian notebook, and it parses Markdown, and it says here's a line of result from inside of a Markdown file, and it could take me to that. And it has its own Markdown editor, where I can just go and find it in Obsidian and open it there too.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well
Does it parse PDF that's been indexed or anything like that?
I I think so. It probably parses the text within PDFs out of the box. I'd have to try it to be sure, but I'm sure that there are plugins to OCR any PDF that has images of text and do that within the indexer. Nextcloud has a lot of plugins that you would hope that it has, and there's free OCR software to plug into things like that.
I don't think it's doing deep indexing in just files, but if they're called notes, like if they're specifically covered by the Notes app, then it looks like it's working. At least that's what's happening on my instance. But do you use
I'll
the
try mine
Notes
right now.
app? Yeah, give it a shot.
In my Nextcloud, I don't use the Nextcloud Notes app. Let me search for September. That should show up. It should find my diary. So I just searched for September, and it's showing me the homepage of September in my diary, which is in Obsidian format. It's a Markdown file, but it's not tagged as it's not tagged as belonging to Nextcloud Notes.
Wow, cool. Oh, I have to poke around with that. Yeah, there was, Brandon, there was something I was using for local search over all my files. I mean, it sounds like Brandon might have found this built into Nextcloud now. There are plugins you can add to Nextcloud that specifically do it. Like it would basically just run Elasticsearch on all your PDFs, LibreOffice documents, Word documents, everything, and then search that index, it was kind of a big mess. I never had it working perfectly, but it kind of worked. But there's another one I was using, Circ. Circ has a weird name, SEA, Circ. Ugh, I have to find it, but I feel like there's a long way to go with that stuff on Linux and self-hosted FOSS stuff. Maybe there's something you can buy. I don't really know. Nobody's paying me to advertise one, so I'm not going to.
I'm going to correct myself.
It feels like something you could write. It feels like something that's a pretty easy, like, undergrad C and HTML project that then interfaces with a really good indexer, something like that.
I'm going to correct myself and say that my Nextcloud out of the box is not searching inside of Markdown files, but it's only searching the file names. So sorry about that. But I'm sure that there's a plugin that will say I want to index inside of my Markdown files. And the key is just with all of your programs, all of your services, use plain text files if you can.
Yeah. Yeah. So the one that I was using is called Full Text Search, and it's Nextcloud plugins, but also you actually also have to run a full Elasticsearch server, which I had running for a while, but it's pretty heavyweight. Like it's this giant Java app. It's kind of a mess. Here's one that a buddy of mine, or that I don't remember who started this. I think it was who's that guy from Google? Yeah, I forget his name. Anyway, Perkeep is maybe dead, but the idea is pretty cool. Basically, get all of your stuff from everywhere and get it somewhere local where you can search and manipulate it on your own and keep it forever too. So Perkeep is kind of that idea of Perkeep is something I really liked.
Hey, Adam, I've got a separate question. I'm not sure if we're still in your talk agenda, but can you talk about what OS upgrades are like and what container upgrades are like within your setup? Like you set up your server and you let it sit for 6 months and then you say, oh, my software's out of date. What do I do? How does that work?
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, there's a chapter on it. Let me see where that is. So for updating the OS, Ubuntu has kind of a standard way to update it, which is kind of the same as Debian's, and you just do apt update and apt full upgrade is kind of one easy way to do it. So that's the OS itself. If you use my recipe to set up your server, then it shouldn't be very customized at all. So it should just be, you should be able to roll along with the upgrades. Right now I think I'm showing 2404, and so it should be good for the next 7-8 years or something like that, however long Ubuntu 2404 is. So that's the OS. And upgrading a container, there's a couple ways to do it. So there's a thing called Watchtower that'll actually upgrade containers for you. And so you can use that. And I briefly cover that in the book. Or you can just change the version number in the Docker config file and bring the container back up, and it'll automatically pull down the latest image and make a new container from the fresh image. So is that it? There's just the OS and the container. For the OS, it's just the same as any Debian apt, and use apt to update it. Sometimes you have to reboot. And then for each container, you can use Docker Compose. Yeah, Docker Compose will detect if there's a new one available. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, Watchtower pulls down new images for you. Otherwise, you're going to do here. I'll just show you. Let's just do a quick one here. I'll show you. Okay, so here's my server. Let's see if I can just update it. Sudo apt update, sudo apt full upgrade. Yeah, that's a bunch. Okay, I'm not going to upgrade the OS right now because it'll take a while, but it'll just grab all that stuff. And I see I'm running 2404 LTS. This will be good for a long time. So then let's upgrade a container. So we'll do one I know is going to upgrade. Probably Wallabag. Let's see if there's a new one. DC Wallabag pull. So pull will look for new images. And there's a new image for Valkey. Are you guys familiar with Valkey? It's like a Redis replacement, since they kind of changed the Redis licensing or something. And so this is a pretty popular fork. And then this will show you which ones changed, and they'll automatically upgrade. Orphan containers. Oh, okay. So I changed the name of my container. The container that used to have Redis now runs Valkey, and so it's just reminding me to kill a container. Okay, so that's it. Here's the new image was pulled right here, and then this is doing the update right now. It destroys the old containers and then creates the new ones. And the service is down briefly while it's doing that. So if you care about uptime, there are ways to do it. Like, let's see, I'll show you this really quick. Docker stats. Oops. Okay, so here, make this a little wider. Okay, so here, this one after all of these container names means that there's only one replica. So if you scale out a little bit and run multiple replicas of your service, that's one way to have less downtime if you care about that kind of thing. But going back here, any questions on the upgrades, Brendan?
No, that answers my question. I wanted to make a comment about if you care about downtime. If you live with family, where downtime and maintenance windows matter is everything that the living room TV depends on.
That's the truth. For me, I'm running a Raspberry Pi at home, and it does catch quite a bit of traffic. I think it's still 20% or something of our traffic. But if Pi-hole goes down, you're going to know about it. So you can run 2 DNS servers. There's quite a bit you can do. Yeah, you can detect when it goes down. So, but I don't even need uptime coma because somebody will just tell me. That's not good enough. You're muted, Tom.
it helps if I unmute. I understand the TV conversation all too well. I actually decided that I wanted to run a Dockerized Pi-hole and a physical Pi-hole so that I could always have DNS uptime. So I could reboot any machine whenever, and everything would stay up. The other piece is that I'm starting to get to the point where I have essentially an externally facing uptime Kuma, and I want to have an internally facing uptime Kuma so that I know before my family tells me that something is down.
Yeah. I've been pretty amazed at how, like, some of these services are, I don't know, most of them seem quite robust. The only time this stuff goes down for me, there have been a couple of bad upgrades. Nextcloud, when you pull, if you accidentally get like the latest release of Nextcloud, that'll usually break. You want to be one behind. I've had Wallabag break itself a couple times. But in general, these things just kind of keep running, and Docker keeps them up. But, well, you're doing the nice thing, Don, by getting yourself alerted before the TV doesn't work. That's really good.
Yeah, I went so far. It's like I've been all into the Matrix channels and using the Matrix technology a lot lately. I took all of the things that do notifications, and I had all of them from, like, say, Home Assistant or from Uptime Kuma point into my Matrix. Like, I have a notification room, and so I'll get a ping on my watch as soon as something goes down. In fact, something just went down during this meeting, and I don't know why. I'm still debugging it, but luckily nobody's home, so it doesn't matter.
Nice.
This thread reminds me that another thing that if you go down this rabbit hole of setting up your own IT services at home like this, you need to have some kind of a notebook with, here's how I set up the service, here's how it works, here's what I do if I want to add a user. Write this all out ahead of time. Do your backup, come up with a backup plan, execute your backup plan, try to restore a backup, or how do I restore one folder from the backup? Have all this stuff written out. And then the really critical thing is, whatever that notebook is, you need to be able to access that entire notebook if the whole network goes down.
Good point.
So
Yeah,
that's
the
Nextcloud, or however you do it, you've got to do that. Go ahead.
or a really good plugin to print the stuff out onto physical paper.
Yeah.
We still have that somewhere, I'm sure.
Save it as a PDF file on a thumb drive.
Yeah, exactly.
Make sure it's the kind that you can plug into your phone if the other machines are offline.
Yeah, and to Don's point there in chat, if you don't test it, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Just assume it's broken. Yeah. What was the thing that hit us the other day? Our power went out. Our power never goes out here in Seattle. We're pretty much on the grid. But just the other day it went out, and my partner's like, I still don't know how to start the server. I have IPMI tool, and I got to put in the password because I put on full disk encryption, and it's a pain because you have to type in a password, and there's ways to work around it, but those are painful too. Like, one issue with, you got one server, a bunch of things running on it, and like 2 versions of PHP and MySQL, and they just conflict or something. It's a real pain. So with Docker, like, each thing has its own sandbox. And then you got all the bundled dependencies right there. I think that's really, really meaningful and really important. So yeah, so with complexity in mind, go ahead.
Oh, no, after you.
Well, I was just going to say, with complexity in mind, I mean, in the book, I talk about, here's how to do it all the hard way, basically. Here's how to get from the ground up your own services running. But just recently, I've been looking into TrueNAS Scale. Is anybody using this?
I've been meaning to.
There was a guy that did a talk here recently about that, I believe.
Oh, yeah? What do you guys, anybody have thoughts on it, opinions?
Jerry, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there somebody with TrueNAS Scale talking about it?
It wasn't specific to TrueNAS Scale. That was part of a talk about Proxmox. And TrueNAS Scale is one of them.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, he was Proxmox VM hosting. Yep, and then he was running TrueNAS Scale.
Right.
I see. Yeah, so Proxmox is cool too, but in particular, I was like, I think TrueNAS Scale might be a shortcut to do what I do in my book. So I think it's still valuable to learn all this stuff, but just wanted to bring it up is I love talking about competition. I think that's great that I think every open source project should list all its competitors and then, let the best one bubble up, because that's the real point of sharing all this stuff. And so I just wanted to bring up TrueNAS Scale, is that might be an easier way to do what I talk about in my book. I haven't tried it yet, but so far it looks pretty cool. It's all GPL. It's based on Debian. I don't know. The thing I'm wondering is if there might be, I don't know if it's annoying or if there's ads or stuff like that, whatever. Like Ubuntu basically has ads built into it now. They're not obtrusive. It's not a lot, and they're mainly advertising for stuff that's either free of charge or is open source, but there are ads inside of it, which I'm kind of like, okay. So I'm curious about TrueNAS Scale, if it's, kind of respectful, if it's done with good taste or what it's like. I haven't used it yet.
So that brings me to my OS question, which you've probably been asked a couple of times, and stop me if this is a bad time to ask, but I've been an enterprise Linux user, so CentOS mainly, and then Red Hat for work because that's what we have to do because it's annoying, but also Rocky and Alma. Have you been asked, and do you have an answer to how do you do what's in your book? And I just bought your book, so maybe it's addressed there. Can we do this? I mean, I know we can. Is there a path to doing this on Enterprise Linux or on CentOS, Rocky, Alma? Do you address that at all, or is that just hey, translate this from Debian?
I don't address it directly because I think you could set up. I mean, if you just insist on using a particular one, you'll get it to work, no problem. I mean, the layer that basically the drop-off layer of prerequisite is Docker Compose, and that runs equally well on any of those things.
Exactly.
So,
I didn't know if there's, and I'm not married. To it. It's just more of a general question if you've been asked at all.
Yeah. No. Not often. I think one person was like, "Does it work on Debian?" I'm like, "Yeah, it'll work. Don't worry about it." I mean, if you get through the book, you'll be able to just swap out the word Ubuntu for Debian or.
Okay, so it's just like the bottom layer is Docker, not the OS on which it lives, and that's good enough for me.
Yeah, if you can install Docker and Docker Compose on any Linux flavor that you prefer, everything else should work. Well, Ansible, but Ansible,
I need to look at
Ansible installs everything too.
Ansible's just the admin computer though. So, but the Ansible config file, like it would have to be tested because there may be some little Ubuntu thing I've thrown in the Ansible configs that I'm just not aware of. So that's why I list.
So you may be getting feedback then, I guarantee.
Hey, no, I would love it. No, that's great. Patches welcome. I'm not going to maintain forks for other target OSs, but anybody's welcome to. I mean, I think it shouldn't be much work at all. I think if there's any work.
Cool. It'll be fun to find out.
Yeah, cool. Can I ask which one would you target if you try this?
So the thing in my basement is Rocky 9 right now, but I honestly don't care. So obviously CentOS Stream is not something I want to put it on. Rocky is something that I've just have here, so I'm going to try that first. If that doesn't work, then I'll just throw it on an Ubuntu box and move on with my life.
Is Rocky like the new CentOS, basically?
Yes. Rocky and Alma are the new CentOS.
And Rocky
I also have a ton of Red Hat. I just don't, I don't want to put it on that because I hate IBM, but, whatever.
I got a quick question about Rocky 9. I tried that recently on a little set-top box. And I was planning on using it on my TV to do videos, but the video quality was absolute crap. So I'm wondering if the problem is that it was with Rocky's video drivers, or if or it might be a hardware problem with the video
I'd assume it uses something like one of the more generic video drivers. I can't imagine that it's Rocky, but it's worth looking into, seeing what else, what graphics chip you have.
Okay. I guess I'll try putting Fedora on it and see if that works better. Yeah, the reason why I tried
one I'm interested.
Go ahead,
John.
That's the first machine I had that it was actually able to support the x86 64 version too. All my other machines were too old for it.
Another OS I'm really interested in getting to figuring out is Nix OS. Have you guys talked about that much? Nix is an interesting one because they do a lot of things differently, but the idea is like it's almost like containerization, but at the library level. So imagine instead of your like userlib or whatever, you got userlib that is for a particular version of the OS and every package. I've heard it's quite painful. Yeah, and it's declarative, and like Haskell fans love it. It's quite painful to get started with, but then it's a lot closer to reproducible builds for a whole OS. And you can make an unmodifiable OS. You can do rollbacks easily. I think for ephemeral machines, it makes a lot of sense. So I'm just going to spin up these containers or VMs or whatever. Nix is really cool for that. So that's one I was interested in. I tried to get it running on a desktop, and that was just a disaster. But
Yeah, I think Zach.
Jerry, they did a thing at the physically at MIT years ago at the BLU.
On Nix?
Yeah, I feel they did. I feel they went to they presented at BLU at MIT years ago. I might be hallucinating.
Yeah, I don't remember. Jabbermite. Zach, who was at our barbecue, volunteered to give a talk on it.
But I just joined 10 seconds ago, and I do have some things to say about Nix. So,
what do you recommend for people that want to learn Nix? What's the way to get started?
So unfortunately, the biggest problem that I have with Nix is the documentation is really bad. A lot of times, stuff will be outdated, and even on the forums, sometimes people just recommend you to read the source code if you want to see how to configure something. So I would say if you want to learn Nix, the best way is to look at example configurations that other people have made, because there's a lot of stuff in there that you can't get in the official documentation. And I'll say once you get past the initial learning curve, which is very steep, it really does get very easy to the point where it's actually significantly easier than doing things the old-fashioned way. So I would say don't give up if you're getting discouraged.
Cool.
Hey, Jerry. Well, I was typing a comment in the chat. I think I heard you ask me a question, but I didn't get to what your question was. You remember what it was?
I don't think I asked you a question.
I could have sworn I heard someone say Jabber.
Don't know. I just anyway. I think maybe Zach at one future point we can do the Nix OS. That's what we discussed at the barbecue.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I can do that. And Nix. So Nix is not just an OS. There are a lot of other useful tools that use Nix. I can talk about those things as well. It's not just the OS.
Yeah, that's great.
I think
Can I ask one more question? Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, I think their December meeting is still open for Zach. Let me just double check that.
Adam, can I ask one more question? I'm sorry, I'm hogging the questions here.
Go ahead.
Does your book address anything about self-hosting? Oh my God, I forget the name of it. It's like a self-hosted Spotify, self-hosted streaming music, because I found myself in a situation where my current work blocks, all of the web things that it would normally block. But if I put in my own URL with my music library that's local, I could get to it. And so I've been looking into these self-hosted, Spotify type apps. Does your book address that at all? Or have any suggestions? There's a few that I've started trying, but my home firewall is not where it needs to be yet. But
Yeah. One in particular that I really like is called Jellyfin. Have you heard of that one?
I think I've heard of it. Yeah, I've heard of it, but
Yeah.
I've only implemented one, and it was very brief. So this is cool to see suggestions.
Jellyfin's great. It's kind of a Plex clone. I mean, so if you follow the book, you start it up like that. That's it. DC Jellyfin up -D, and then you can get to it. And so you're on your own getting your media, but assuming you got a library of music or movies or home movies or whatever, it's great. We use it constantly. So my kids have their own playlists, and I love that they'll have those playlists for the rest of their lives. You know, as long as I keep the server up, I suppose, or my wife, then they'll have that. And I mean, I've heard some kind of horror stories about the people are spending all this time on Spotify and then they mess up their account, or they have Apple Music and they got tons and tons of stuff and then they can't give it to their kid or something. And I mean, maybe they'll fix those problems, maybe they won't, but they're not on the hook to. That's not their their MO is not to make it easy for us to manage our own data. So I think that's important to remember about all these companies they'll make it convenient, but I don't think we're gonna get ultimately what we want without owning our data a bit.
So Adam,
Or at least
about
owning the playlists.
There you go.
about
Sure.
Jellyfin,
Yeah.
I've been using Jellyfin for a couple of years for, I would call it, I use it for long form content, audiobooks, radio plays, film and TV shows. And Jellyfin is great about remembering, like, if you play a file for like more than 30 seconds and then stop playing a file, it'll remember and it'll show you on the home screen, you want to resume here. But I haven't tried Jellyfin for short form stuff, like just throw a playlist together of a bunch of 4-minute songs. And so you're saying it does work. I don't actually consume media in that way. I listen to an entire album as in one go. But does it work well for individual short form things and making random playlists and saying like this is related to that? I
Yeah.
don't know how people experience media like that, but it's good to know if it actually is good for that.
Yeah, like say you got 10 different albums of ambient music and you take one track from each, you can make a playlist of those and it'll go through them in order random. Just like, I mean, there's a lot of music apps that do it. And there's great mobile apps and like set top apps for Jellyfin. So if you have a Roku TV, there's an open source Jellyfin app that'll run on your TV.
And I'm assuming there's an Android app, something
Yeah.
like that.
I think the
Okay.
Apple ecosystem apps are not as good or maybe missing. I'm not really sure about that. We don't use Apple as much in my house, but there's great Android and TV apps, and I'm not sure about iOS and Mac.
And on your desktop where you are using Jellyfin, the
Yeah.
desktop client for Jellyfin, I think it's an Electron app. It's pretty fat, and you might be against Electron apps, but be aware that the desktop app that you install for Jellyfin supports more codecs than your browser supports. So if your collection is a chaotic mix of whatever you found in odd places and with odd codecs, you want to use the Jellyfin desktop client instead of the web browser to access your Jellyfin collection.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Yeah. Does it just bundle MPV or something?
Yeah, well, it bundles everything you need. If Jellyfin supports that
Um,
media codec, it's in the desktop client. And
I,
if you use a browser
yeah,
that doesn't have that codec, it's going to have to go through a transcoding process.
I see.
Yeah.
So it's
Sadly,
something
a lot of the.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, something I
Oh
mentioned
no,
briefly in the I'll just go. I'll make it quick. Something I mentioned briefly in the book is a GPU, and once I got a GPU working with my Jellyfin server, then because I was having problems with videos here and there, or like my brother's 1,500 miles away and he was streaming stuff to his place, and the GPU makes it all makes it work quite a bit better. So it can work with quite a few different GPUs, and it wasn't hard to configure, but it did require a different Docker container runtime and a couple settings changed.
So I got a question about the media management. Because I've tried a bunch of different video managers, but they all really failed what I need to do. because they basically all wanted to do their own scanning to try to find my videos instead of me telling them where it was. And most of the
Can I
time,
take that question?
what's
I
that?
have some experience with that in Jellyfin, and what my general advice is, first read the documentation for Jellyfin. It's a little sketchy, but it basically tells you, here's the file structure you want to use. And the first decision you want to make is, am I going to be letting Jellyfin grab data from public services like IMDb and Amazon, or am I not going to do that? And if you do want to do that, grab the data from the internet, then you want to go through and name your files that put actually the internet IDs of your media into the folder names and the folder names and the file names. And if you don't want to grab the metadata from the internet, then you can just turn that feature off and you don't have to tag them. But you do have to lay out your files in a certain way and say that these are my chapters of a DVD. These are the chapters of an audiobook or the episodes of a TV program.
Yeah.
It tells you the format for the file names. And
Okay.
then again, if you want to grab the stuff from the internet, put the ID into the folder name and it'll grab the right record.
Okay, you jumped in too soon there because you're basically describing exactly what I don't want to do.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, what I already have things laid out the way I want them, and I've already tagged the metadata myself with the IMDb IDs.
Yep.
And what I wanted to be able to do is just tell it to use this stuff. So I basically have all sorts of downloaded videos of different file names, all sorts of different file names. I don't want to have to rename everything.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to fight with the software or change everything.
In my experience, if you don't use the file name format of Jellyfin, if Jellyfin's file name format conflicts with your system, then you either need to make a bunch of symlinks or you're just going to be fighting with Jellyfin.
And that's been true of every other video manager I've tried.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right,
I
you
mean,
could make a
I wouldn't
script that
say
could
it's
make
quite
your
automatic.
symlinks.
Yeah, I had to move stuff around a bit. It felt about the same as Plex, or what was it I used to use, Google Music or something? Because I have quite a bit of music. I've collected a lot of CDs and ripped all of them. And you just have to have them laid out a certain way with proper ID3 metadata. And then for videos, it's a little bit similar. Like they just have to be, it has to be named a little bit. So I didn't find it too fiddly, but I think I might have taken on a bit more pain than you, John.
And also do read the manual. Like before you even install it, just read the manual and it'll tell you, like, I think there might be some cases where you can say, never mind my file name. If it has this kind of a tag, use the tag instead, ignore everything else.
Oh, interesting. That would be helpful.
What I really want to do is be able to give it something I can point it to my Postgres database that has everything in it, and just pick the stuff out of that. And I can create virtual tables to satisfy whatever needs the video software needs. But I don't want to have it scanning the file system itself and just second guessing what I've already done. Because my work process basically is I get new videos, I put them in a date stamped directory of what I downloaded that day or that week, and then I add the IMDb tags to them, which I get from the tar files that I download once a week from the FTP site for IMDb.org. I've got a bunch of shell scripts that parse through that so I can match it up to either movies or the TV episodes. And it works fine in my PHP script, PHP pages, but those are like one page in each of the directories. And what I'm trying to do is consolidate them all into one system, which is why I'd like to use something like Plex or Jellyfin or whatever.
I think if you made if you made a script that would create symlinks to the original files, that the symlinks are named the way that the new system you want it for playback, the way that it wants files to be named, I think that would be a good direction to go in. But it'd be a little bit of work, but I think that might be useful. And you can always throw away the symlinks and run your script to create them again.
Yeah, this sounds like a fun job for a script, and then just a cron job to run on wherever the stuff is placed on a regular basis.
Yeah, I don't have to think about that, I guess.
Yeah, so one use case with Jellyfin that I like is my kids will be, say one of my kids takes a video with their little camera and they have it on their computer, just a desktop in the house. They can just drag it onto a folder and then it syncs through Nextcloud, shares a directory with Jellyfin, and Jellyfin notices when any new media shows up in its folders. And so then they can stream it from the TV or a tablet, or my brother can 1,500 miles away. So I found it pretty handy. The folder stuff aside, I think they just throw these videos in one folder and they just show up and they have a title, a date, and then it grabs a thumbnail automatically. And so that ends up being enough automation for us. We haven't had to mess with backend stuff. And then once a video is in Jellyfin, you can also manipulate the metadata about it. You can say who's in the video, the year, and all kinds of just tons of metadata about the video if you wanted to go down rabbit hole that way. And I mean, when the next thing, the thing that's really important to me though, is like when the next thing comes along that's better than Jellyfin, I think it'll be pretty easy to extract your data out of it. It's obviously all open source, but I've actually gone through the metadata. A lot of it's just in XML files. I think it'd be pretty easy to extract. And I would guess that the Jellyfin successor, whatever it may be, will just have like an import, migrate, import, something like that. I don't know. With a lot of these self-hosted services, that's what I'm looking for. Is it popular enough? Does it make enough sense that when the next best thing comes along, I'll be able to migrate to that? Because I've been stuck in different, I don't know. I used to take notes on an iPad and then I couldn't get those notes off. It just drives me crazy. How do there's ways to do it, but it's a real pain. That should never be painful, right? It should be the easiest thing ever. I just spent all this time entering 20 notes. I should be able to just export them in a second. But I don't think that's often made easy for us.
People don't want to do portability because even in an open source person, they want to keep your stuff and they want you to use their stuff. They'll talk about portability, but I think that should be like upfront first and foremost. Is portability is king when it comes to these apps because people move around, and it just seems natural that you should let them do so. But everybody still has that little "hey, stick with me" mentality, even a little bit, and that's natural.
Yeah, I had hundreds of notes in my Palm Pilot, and getting them transferred. I was able to transfer them on Windows, and then was able to further transit to Evernote.
Jerry, I still have my Palm Pilot export from my last one. That's still sitting. It's sitting in my Dropbox, sadly, but it's still there. I have not pulled the export yet. But yeah, getting out of Apple, it's possible because I've run it a couple of times to pull everything out of iCloud. But it's not pleasant, and you can't sync. And syncing is key if you want to get it between those different systems.
I missed the graffiti text input system. I thought that was, I could input text with graffiti faster than I could with pen on paper.
I remember that. That was clever. That was way ahead of its time.
I have an Apple Newton hanging around here somewhere.
I mean, wouldn't that be nice though if it was never sometime in the future, from now on, I know I'm always going to be able to get the stuff back out. And I feel like with many of these self-hosted services, especially the free software ones, it's often the case that they have there's no reason for them to lock you in. They're just like, fine, if you want to use this software, great, go for it. Sometimes there's commercial offerings too, but I think it's like even Nextcloud, I think, has been quite good about, okay, there's migration guides. I mean, I guess I don't know if they publish migration guides from Nextcloud, but it's just a whole file system being synced around. There isn't much value on top of that. So Nextcloud actually is a fork of OwnCloud. So it's already I've migrated from OwnCloud to Nextcloud.
It feels like it's almost it's going to take a legislation, like an EU legislation type of a thing, like here. But then you've got to have people agreeing on universal data formats, and now we're going back to RFCs and things like that. So
Sure.
the stuff is there. It's just it takes a lot of coordination, and
Well,
that's why just stay with open source. And hopefully you'll be able to, if a method of portability of that metadata or all of the aspects in all the fields doesn't exist, somebody will come up with it because it's available compared to all these closed things.
yeah, I mean, we can try and force companies to do it. And the FTC is doing that with Apple right now. I mean, there was just a FTC suit against Apple where they won, just like green bubbles and blue bubbles. It's crazy what's going through the legislation. But I just think they don't really need to do, like, Apple doesn't need to make it easy to get out of Apple. I mean, they should, but they don't, and we can't count on them to do it. So I don't know. That was one of my big motivators and all this stuff was like, I guess I just need raw access. I mean, I really want health records. I want to be able to transfer money between my banks. I don't know. Health records are pretty close, actually. There are some self-hosted apps you can use that'll use Fire, that protocol, to grab your medical records and consolidate them. So you can quickly look back at what immunizations you've got or whatever, your last 20 visits. Let me just see, how much did I spend? That should be just easy. But like the banks clearly put brick walls in place of you getting your own data and transferring between them. No way. I don't know if I'll see that in my lifetime. That has to be a big stick from the government to make that possible. Maybe in the EU. I've heard that German banks, you can transfer between them.
Well, I used to be able to transfer between Bank of America and DCU.
Is that right? Oh my gosh.
Oh, absolutely.
That's cool. I mean, you can do ACH, right? But I mean, like, to do it from your desktop from GNU Cache or something, I don't think they let you. You can't suck down I don't even think you can suck down
There
OFX
used to
anymore.
be a format. It actually used to be easier, and now it's harder. And that's one of those things. And like, they're like, why did you make this harder? I kind of understand there were probably a lot of security issues and whatnot, but I used to be able to download direct from Bank of America, direct from my banks, and I still run, like I put in the chat earlier, 1995's Microsoft Money, which needs to change. I understand. It used to be really easy to get the data. Now it's harder without being already signed into these things. So
Yeah.
it's a shame.
Well, hey, this has been a pretty, like, we've gone all around the bend with this stuff. But honestly, all these things we're talking about, I apologize if I'm on a soapbox, but these are the reasons that drive me to self-host. Data sovereignty, is something I discuss a lot in the book. It's like, okay, let's get all, fancy about it and call it data sovereignty. I mean, I think they use that term to talk about national data sovereignty, like in other in other countries and stuff. But I think it's useful to think of yourself as like, okay, yourself, your family, whatever, your friends, your church group, whoever it is. Like, there's a small group of people that you really care about, and you can help them, and you have skills above and beyond. You have different skills, and so it's an amazing thing to be able to offer to a group of people. I think. It's tricky, right? Like, it should be, you have to make sure it's useful. And so I talk a lot of the book about you should get feedback from users. You should dog food what you do. You should have a backup and decide what you actually self-host ahead of time to make sure it's useful and not just a pet project. Don't end up writing a book about it, because, then you really know you're down the rabbit hole. This stuff, the problem with this stuff is it's really fun too. I've had so much fun tweaking this stuff and getting it to work. And then, when you see it just like come online and see people using it and getting value, that's great. I guess that's like, a good selfishness or something like that.
I remember back when the Internet of Things was brand new. One of my first questions when I heard about it was, how would I host the servers for all these things in my own home?
Oh, have you guys talk about Home Assistant? Oh,
I don't think
oh
there's
my
been a
gosh.
BLU thing on that. That would be awesome. I had an Insteon house. Unfortunately, I bought it. It was all wired in, and Insteon went out of business, and I couldn't turn my lights off or change the settings. And so we had to learn about Home Cloud very, very quickly, or Home Cloud, or Home Assistant very, very quickly. That stuff is awesome, and there should be a talk on that here.
Yeah, my attitude back then was if I'm going to buy one of these things, I don't want to depend on some external server and some corporation somewhere. I want to control the software first. Otherwise, I'm not buying the damn thing. So I still haven't bought any of them so many years later.
And
Yeah,
I
I
could be
mean,
wrong, but
what are
Home
the
Assistant.
chances?
Oh, go ahead.
What are the chances you get a home controller for the water sensor on your water heater and it's still going to work 5 years from now? I just I don't trust that.
None.
Like,
That literally we could, like, my wife was crying. She's like, "Why did we buy a house where we no longer control the lights?" And I'm like,
yeah,
I didn't
it's crazy.
put it in, but I get what you're saying, and now I'm scared for everyone forever. Luckily, Home Assistant exists, but I was like, well, what if their interface to all of these, what if you go down that rabbit hole and you're like, holy crap, we can't depend on anything.
Well, I think with the home assistant, let's compare briefly. Our banks, I think, have a real. They're like trying to protect their. All they get is like money on the transaction or something. Like they are protecting such a fragile thing that they'll be willing to piss off customers by not allowing them to download OFX or whatever it is. Home Assistant and the things it works with, I think it's offloading from those IoT vendors. They're like, okay, fine, we don't like, what's everybody going to use? Zigbee, whatever. I mean, otherwise they have to make their own controller, and I think it's easier for them to just work with the standards and those standards do exist. So not Zigbee, that's a proprietary one, right? But I think it's in the interest of those vendors for all the IoT devices. And also there's quite a few IoT devices that are open source. I mean, these ESP32 little kits, you can plug into this and that, you can tweak, and it's not that hard. So hey, if you do a talk about Home Assistant, Don, I want to see that too.
Yeah, the last talk we did on
Yeah, if anybody's got a good setup.
Last time we did any IoT talks was before COVID. I don't even remember what year it was.
Yeah, I mean, like the kind of stuff you can, if you have like an electric car, maybe you got a couple thermometers and a solar panel. Like the more little things you have in the house, the more Home Assistant is pretty cool. Someone was telling me, was it that at the BELUG meeting? I don't know if anybody was there, but I was at a Bellevue Linux group user group meeting last week, and they were talking about using Home Assistant because the Home Assistant Android app can create an alarm. So just the integration with Home Assistant let them do fancy things with notifications to Android phones. So like, I mean, they're basically between the phone and their server, they're getting good control of their whole ecosystem. Oh, actually, and let me put in a plug for an open source phone that I'm using now with my Nextcloud server that I absolutely love. So these phones, you got to check them out. Completely open source. They come out of this company in France, and the OS, you can install the OS on an existing phone. It's a fork of Lineage OS, which is a fork of Android open source, but it works quite well. It's very polished, and it works well with Nextcloud. And so with this, I have kind of a total offline phone cloud experience. Contacts, mapping and tracking stuff on a map, documents syncing, calendars, tasks, that kind of thing is all integrated between my phone and Nextcloud server.
Can you compare it to the Pine phone at all?
Yeah, I mean, boy, what Marina does is they try and make it act exactly like Android or an iPhone, but use open source. And there's only like one proprietary app on it because they just don't have a better Maps app or something like that. Pine phone is a total, like that's from scratch, right? That's a Linux based OS, and I'd love to use a Pine phone, but I've heard they're just not quite practical. I'd love to.
Yeah, it's not there.
Okay. So I mean, Yeah, the Marina phone. If you've ever used CyanogenMod or Lineage OS, I would say it's even more polished than those. It's great. Yeah, there's some little things. I think it doesn't work with Google RCS, but I don't know. I try and get people to use Signal anyway.
What's Google RCS? So when I think RCS, I think of the original source control system. What?
Right, RCS. That's the original RCS. I still use
Before
that. SVN,
there was RCS.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. RCS, CVS, SVN. Yeah, RCS is rich communication services, I think. It's a protocol on top of SMS so that from Google's perspective, like Google couldn't interoperate with iMessage. So Google and Apple have a pissing contest. Google comes up with RCS, Apple has iMessage. And now apparently you can send text messages, SMS text messages, and give a thumbs up from either direction, which I care so little about, but it just drives me crazy to get I send a text message to an Apple phone and then I get a so-and-so liked blah, blah, blah. It's just the silliest thing.
I don't know if this is a common experience, but I use Android-based phones, or well, Graphene OS, which is a fork of Android. My wife has an iPhone, and we text all the time, like just status updates and whatever. And the fact that she's on iOS and I'm on Android has never been a topic of conversation. Like we send SMS, we know that it's not secure, and it works.
Wait till you join a group chat and you're the only person without that blue bubble and you break the group chat. That's when you notice it.
That's the worst.
I do group chats in Matrix, and that works for me.
Yeah.
And if you're not on Matrix, then too bad, you're not in my group chats.
Well, it's a big deal for like high schoolers. I mean, like ostracizing and just othering and stuff. It's a mess, for kids. I think it's a mess. And I don't know that comes up a lot, and unless you have to worry about it. But I think these kids struggle with it.
They really ought to pick a more free service that can install on their phones and use that instead of SMS.
Oh, but that extra step, that default matters so much. Check out the latest FTC case because they were arguing about defaults. Like because people use the default, so the default wins. This is the same concept behind the antitrust cases of Microsoft back in the aughts, and now it was against Google being doing default search deals, like Apple's paying Google 42 billion or something to be the default. What is it? I don't even remember, but the defaults really matter. So that
the default search engine.
Yeah, default search engine. So and the default texting on an iPhone, it just works, right? You're using message, who cares? And then for certain people, it looks cooler. But it's a really, really big deal, and Apple knows it. Tim Cook talks fairly openly about this in interviews. How you want your mom to be able to get blue bubbles? Well, buy her an iPhone, something like that. I think
there's statistics out there on how many people would leave the Apple ecosystem if iMessage weren't its own thing, and if it were interoperable between things. And there's numbers out there, and apparently Apple would lose enough money where it's actually worth them being the jerks on this because of that particular thing. It holds people there into the ecosystem so strongly.
Yeah, and if it didn't, why would they bother? Why wouldn't they? Yeah, I believe it.
Well, whether the government fixes it or not, and whether you feel that the government should fix it, the one thing that you can do now is encourage everyone to act in a way that they're not pushing that green bubble, blue bubble crap on other people.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just knowing that there's another alternative is useful. A lot of people don't know, or they'll get this thing. Somebody sends them a Signal thing, and they're like, "Oh, why do I have to, bother with this?"
Another app.
Yeah, yet another app. Yeah, so Home Assistant. I don't know. I think so. My book, I only cover 5 services. One of them happens to be Jellyfin. Lucky for you, Brandon. But it's more about setting up a little service plane where you could stand up any self-hosted app. I say any because almost all of them run in Docker. You know, if they're making something to be self-hostable, they'll generally include a Docker compose instruction. So yeah, well, that's pretty much all I got, Jerry. So what if you want to talk about other stuff or?
Yeah, well, I've actually found this very, very interesting. Made some notes for myself, and I think Brandon did too.
Nice.
I just got to find the right note-taking stuff to write it down, and it's exportable.
Well, the
Don't hold
Jitsi
your breath.
chapter makes a good note-taking thing.
Or create an LLM that would take the transcript of this Jitsi chat and talk, and then automatically spit out notes that are relevant to my interest based on tags. If we could do that in a self-hosted environment, I'm sold.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.